Okay, so have you ever gotten lost in like a really good game or story? Like one that just totally pulls you in, you kind of forget about everything else?
Yeah, totally. I know exactly what you mean. Like when you're so invested in what's happening that it feels real.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And imagine if instead of just watching or reading, you could actually shape that story. Like your choices actually mattered and could change things.
Well, that's basically what tabletop RPGs like Dungeons and Dragons are all about. It's like collaborative storytelling where everyone gets to contribute and create something amazing together.
And in D&D, the dungeon master or DM is like the narrator, the one who guides the story.
Yeah.
But what happens when the players, those brave adventurers, decide to do something totally unexpected?
That's where improvisation comes in. It's not just about reacting to the unexpected, though. It's more about being prepared for those detours and having a flexible story that can bend and twist without breaking.
That makes sense. So it's like having a plan, but being open to changes along the way.
Exactly. And one game I played, our group was supposed to infiltrate this super secure fortress, like a classic dungeon crawl, But we ended up making friends with these goblins who were planning to rob the fortress's treasury.
Wow. So your DM had to come up with something new on the spot.
Yeah, and it was awesome. It's moments like those that make D&D so much fun. But those moments are possible because the DM knew how to improvise and roll with the punches. The LitRPG Reads article, How to Improvise as a DM, talks about this and suggests a loose structure approach.
Loose structure. What does that mean exactly?
So it's kind of like outlining the important stuff, like key locations, major plot points, and interesting NPCs, but you don't define every single step along the way. You're giving players the freedom to explore and make their own choices.
So it's like having a map, but with multiple paths and maybe some cool side trips instead of just one set route.
Right. And this approach is way more dynamic than trying to plan for every single possibility, because if you try to over-prepare, you end up railroading your players, forcing them down a specific path and limiting their creativity.
Yeah, that makes sense. You want players to feel like their choices actually have an impact on the story.
Exactly. The loose structure lets the story breathe and grow organically based on what the players decide to do.
The LitRPG Reads article also talks about saying yes and to player suggestions. Instead of shutting down their ideas, you build upon them.
Yes, yes and is crucial for collaborative storytelling. It makes players feel like their ideas are valued and that they're actively shaping the narrative.
But what happens when those ideas take the story in a completely different direction? Like, what if they just ignore the main quest you've carefully planned?
That's when things get really interesting. Instead of trying to force them back to your original plan, you find ways to weave elements of that main storyline into their current path.
Also, you're basically adapting your grand plan to fit their choices. That's clever.
Thanks. So, for example, if they're looking for a magical artifact, maybe it's not in the ancient temple you originally planned, but now it's in the hands of a quirky merchant they met in a remote village.
That way, their side adventure still ties into the main story. That's a cool way to honor their choices while keeping things moving forward.
Right, you want to make sure that their actions have consequences and shape the world around them, even if it's not the way you initially imagined.
What about even bigger changes, though? Like, what if they decide to befriend the villain instead of fighting them?
That opens up a ton of possibilities. A villain who's been charmed or persuaded could become a reluctant ally, a source of insider information, or even a future enemy down the line.
Wow, that's a really cool twist. It could create so much tension and intrigue within the group as they try to decide whether they can actually trust this former enemy.
Exactly. It shows how one simple choice can have ripple effects throughout the entire story and lead to unexpected outcomes.
So we've talked about players going in a different direction, but what if they just head off the map completely? Like they go to a place you hadn't even planned for.
Then you embrace the unknown. You surprise them with something cool like a hidden oasis or a forgotten ruin, or maybe a captivating side quest that eventually leads them back to the main plot.
So you're basically turning their curiosity into an opportunity to explore and expand the world. That's awesome.
Sometimes those unexpected detours lead to the most memorable moments, and it keeps the game fresh and exciting for everyone.
It's like you're constantly encouraging them to discover new things and to see where their choices take them.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that every interaction, every detail can be a seed for future adventures.
Like those little breadcrumbs you mentioned earlier. They can lead to all sorts of interesting places.
Right. It's all about creating a world that feels alive and responsive to the player's actions.
It sounds like a delicate balancing act, though.
Yeah,
You need to have a plan, but also be flexible enough to adapt to the player's choices.
it is. And luckily, the LitRPG Reads article offers a bunch of techniques to help DMs navigate this challenge and become better improvisers.
That's great to hear, because I think improvisation is such an important skill for any DM. It's what helps make those games truly special and unforgettable.
I totally agree. It's about creating a story together and being open to the unexpected. And that's what makes tabletop RPGs so unique and rewarding. One technique that I found really useful is the idea of like reweaving. So let's say your players go on a quest that has absolutely nothing to do with your main plot.
Okay.
Instead of like trying to force them back to your original plan, you can like take bits and pieces of the main plot and like weave them into what they're already doing.
So it's like you're kind of adjusting your big picture plan to fit their choices.
Exactly. You're making sure that what they do still matters, even if it's not exactly what you first had in mind.
Right. So it still feels like their actions have an impact on the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And the article mentions using NPCs and plot hooks that are relevant to what the players are up to, kind of subtly guiding them back towards the main story.
It's like you're leaving a trail of breadcrumbs for them to follow.
Kind of, yeah. But in a way that makes them feel like they're still making their own choices.
That's cool. Speaking of breadcrumbs, the article also talks about intentionally planting rumors and mysteries.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Like, imagine your players overhear whispers about some powerful artifact that's hidden away in a distant land.
Okay.
And that artifact just happens to be connected to your main quest line, even though they don't know it yet.
Oh, that's clever. It's like you're planting a seed in their minds and leading them towards your goal without them even realizing it.
Exactly. You're giving them the illusion of choice while still keeping the story on track.
We've been talking about what to do when players go off course, but what about when you need to create something completely new, like right there on the spot?
Well, that's where tools like the quick NPC generator can really come in handy.
What's that?
It's a technique that focuses on a few key elements to help you bring an NPC to life quickly. Like giving them a distinctive voice, a memorable quirk, or a defining personality trait.
Oh, so it's like you're sketching a character with a few bold strokes instead of getting bogged down in all the details.
Yeah. Right. You want to create something that's both memorable and believable, even if you don't have a lot of time to think about it.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
What about dialogue, though? How do you make those improvised conversations sound natural and engaging?
A big part of it is answering player questions with authority. Even if you're not sure of the answer, your NPCs should always sound confident and knowledgeable.
So even if a player asks something totally unexpected, the NPC shouldn't act like they're flustered.
Right. They should have an answer even if it's vague or mysterious. It's all about maintaining the illusion that this is a real world with real people.
I like that. So it's not just about what they say, but how they say it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And speaking of how they say it, another trick is to give your NPCs unique verbal tics. Like maybe the blacksmith always starts his sentences with, "well, now."
Oh, I see. It adds a little bit of personality and it gives you a few extra seconds to think.
Exactly. It's a win-win.
Sometimes, though, it's not just dialogue. It's entire locations that need to be created on the fly. The LitRPG Reads article talks about something called the 5-second setting formula.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. This formula focuses on sensory details.
Sensory details.
Yeah, like imagine your players stumble upon a hidden cave.
Okay.
What do they see? What do they hear? What do they smell? What do they feel? By using vivid descriptions, you can create a really immersive experience.
That's like you're painting a picture with words.
Exactly. You want to appeal to all the senses and really draw your players into the environment.
But it's not just about describing what they see, right?
Yeah.
It's also an element of mood or atmosphere.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Is this cave a place of wonder or danger or something in between? You want to use your words to evoke the right emotions and set the tone for the encounter.
And a good DM would also involve the players in that process, right? Encouraging them to contribute their own details and descriptions.
Absolutely. By getting their input, you're not only making them more invested in the world, you're also lightening your own creative load.
It becomes a truly collaborative experience.
Exactly. And that's what D&D is all about, working together to create something amazing.
It's like you're a conductor leading an orchestra of chaos.
That's a great way to put it. As a DM, you're not just telling a story, you're shaping and guiding the narrative while also giving your players the freedom to explore and make their own choices.
Speaking of chaos, what happens when your players throw you a curveball that completely throws off your carefully planned encounter?
Well, you got to adapt. You got to make sure the challenge is still engaging and balanced.
Yeah.
The LitRPG Reads article suggests a few techniques for doing this without breaking the flow of the game.
So you're not just throwing tougher monsters at them to make things harder.
No, not necessarily. One way to adjust the difficulty is to tweak the enemy's hit points. If the players are breezing through encounters, you can give the enemies a little bit more HP to make the fights last longer.
That's a subtle way to make things more challenging.
Yeah.
What about when you need a more drastic change, though?
Well, you could introduce environmental hazards, for example.
Environmental hazards.
Yeah, like maybe the ground starts to crumble beneath them, or a flash flood sweeps through the area, or even something like a chandelier crashing down from the ceiling.
Oh, wow. Those are some great examples. Like you're turning the environment itself into an enemy.
Exactly. It forces the players to think on their feet and come up with new strategies.
So it's not just about making individual enemies tougher. It's also about changing the battlefield itself.
Right. And sometimes you might need to introduce reinforcements for the enemy side.
Reinforcements.
Yeah, like maybe a hidden trap is triggered and it summons more enemies. Or maybe a group of reinforcements arrives just when the players think they've won.
Ah, so you're adding more enemies to the mix to make things more challenging.
Exactly. And it creates a sense of urgency and raises the stakes for the players.
That's cool. If you want to add a layer of moral complexity, you can introduce a dilemma that forces the players to make tough choices. A dilemma.
Yeah, like maybe the enemies are holding hostages where the players have to choose between saving innocent lives and completing their mission objectives.
Oh, I see. So it's not just about fighting. It's also about making difficult decisions with potentially serious consequences.
Exactly. It makes the game more engaging and thought-provoking.
We've been talking about adapting encounters based on what the players do. But what about when the players come up with their own story twists? How do you deal with that?
It's like you have to decide if it fits into what's already happening. Does it make the story more interesting? Does it create conflicts that make sense? Does it feel like it actually belongs in the world you've built? If the answer is yes, then go for it.
So you're not just accepting any idea they throw at you. You're thinking about how it affects the overall story.
Right. You want to make sure it makes sense and adds to the game, not takes away from it.
Have you seen any player-created twists that worked really well in your games?
Oh yeah, tons of times. I've had players take like a minor NPC and turn them into someone super important. It's always fun to see. Like imagine this humble shopkeeper turns out to be a retired spy master with a secret network of informants.
Wow. That's like a plot twist in a movie or a book.
Yeah.
You think this character is just some random guy, and then bam, there's suddenly a major player.
Exactly. And players are really good at picking up on little details and coming up with their own backstories and stuff. It can really add a lot to the game.
I remember one game where a player figured out that their character's long-lost brother was actually working for the bad guy. It was a total shock, and it made the whole conflict way more personal.
That's a perfect example. It shows how players can really personalize the story and make it their own.
We've talked about deciding whether to use a player's twist, but how do you actually adapt to those changes on the fly?
You have to be flexible.
Yeah.
Sometimes you might need to change some of the things you had planned or introduce new NPCs or even create entire locations right there in the moment.
So it's like all those improvisation skills we talked about before come into play even more.
Exactly. The better you are at thinking on your feet and adapting to new situations, the easier it will be to handle those unexpected twists.
And having a deep understanding of your world helps too, right?
Sure. Oh, for sure. The more you know about the history, the cultures, the hidden places, the easier it will be to come up with believable explanations and make sure that even the craziest twists feel like they belong in the story.
The LitRPG Reads article also mentioned improvising emotional moments and character-driven drama. That sounds really hard, especially when you don't know how the players are going to react.
It is challenging, but it can also be really rewarding. When you can create a moment that makes your players feel something real, it takes the game to a whole other level.
It's like you're not just playing a game anymore. You're experiencing a story together.
Exactly. So how do you do it? Well, it starts with understanding your characters. What motivates them? What are they afraid of? What do they want? By really getting into their heads, you can start to anticipate how they might react in different situations.
So it's like you're creating a profile for each character almost, like a detective.
Kind of.
Oh.
And once you have a good grasp of their personality, you can create situations that challenge them and force them to make difficult choices.
Can you give an example of a situation that might be really emotional?
Sure. Imagine two characters who have always hated each other, but now they're trapped together and they have to rely on each other to survive.
Okay, I can see how that would be tense.
The external threat forces them to put their differences aside and work together. And maybe in the process, they start to see each other in a new light.
It's like they're forced to confront their prejudices and maybe even develop a grudging respect for each other.
Exactly. It's a classic story, but it always works because it taps into something very human.
We talked about emotional moments, but what about suspense? How do you create that feeling of tension and anticipation?
One way is to use foreshadowing. You can drop little hints about upcoming dangers or challenges, just enough to make the player start to worry.
It's like those horror movies where you know something bad is going to happen, but you don't know when or how.
Exactly. You want to keep the players on the edge of their seats wondering what's going to happen next.
And cliffhangers are good too, right?
Oh, yeah. Ending a session right at a crucial moment is a great way to leave the players wanting more.
I can imagine them groaning and begging you to keep playing.
Exactly. It's all about playing with their expectations and keeping them engaged.
The LitRPG Reads article also talked about practicing your improvisation skills, which
Yeah,
makes sense. You can't just expect to be good at it overnight.
definitely. Like any skill, improvisation takes practice. The
Mhm.
more you do it, the better you'll get.
Are there any specific exercises that DMs can do to improve their improv?
Oh, yeah, for sure. One thing you can do is try to create a mini world in like 1 minute. Like come up with its history, its cultures, its conflicts, everything.
Oh, that sounds challenging.
It is.
Yeah,
But it's a great way to practice thinking creatively under pressure.
that's cool. What else?
You can also try improvising dialogue experiment with different voices and accents to see what feels natural.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to be silly. It's all about having fun and pushing yourself outside your comfort zone.
So the key is to just keep practicing and experimenting.
Exactly. The more you do it, the more confident you'll become and the more fun you'll have.
This has been a really insightful deep dive into the world of DM improvisation. Thanks to Ken Chen for his awesome article in LitRPG Reads.
Yeah, it was a great article. Lots of good advice.
And a big shout out to LitRPG Reads and Paul Bello for always providing such amazing content for the tabletop RPG community.
They do a fantastic job.
We'd love to hear from you, our listeners. What are your favorite improvisation techniques? What are some of your most memorable improv moments? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And until next time, may your dice rolls be ever in your favor.